There are dire warnings that New South Wales will be hit by increasingly extreme weather.
2015 was the hottest year since climate records began.
Figures show this July was the single hottest month in recorded history.
Australia sweltered through its hottest spring on record.
Climate change is now affecting every country on every continent.
It's the rate that's of great concern.
And what do you put that rate down to?
Oh, it's human activity.
We have everything we need. Some still doubt that we have the will to act, but I say the will to act is itself a renewable resource.
Hello, beautiful people. I am Georgia Sheil, your host for episode 82 of Climactic. One of the fun things about being a host for this show is that sometimes I get to interview my friends, people I've always admired and lean on for wisdom and support. Today's episode is just that. Asha Kayla has lived corporate social responsibility both in the UK and Australia for 15 years and has helped organisations and local governments grow sustainably and drive positive change. I had the pleasure of getting to know Asha quite intimately when we spent 8 months completing the Centre for Sustainability Leadership Fellowship course in 2017. Say that 10 times. Asha is considered, she's a thoughtful leader and she taps deep into purpose. She's approachable and she's open. I love spending time with her and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. So sit down with us as we reflect on 15 years of corporate social responsibility, the aha moments that solidified her purpose and voice, the strong link between girls' education and climate change, owning your story, and of course, a quick trip to the Sustainability Development Goals, or the SDGs, for good measure. Without any further ado, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. So Asha, this is fantastic. Good friend of mine sitting in this gorgeous, bright sunroom in Bellevue on a Saturday. So it's nice to see you. It's been a while since I've seen you and it's exciting to be talking to you on the podcast today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Now, we met doing a fellowship course and it was really amazing working with you for 8 months. And I was probably one of the least experienced of the crew, had only just sort of dubbed my little toe in the water, but you've actually been working in sustainability for 15 years across countries as well. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about your evolution through corporate social responsibility, sort of where you started and how your career's evolved.
Yeah, well, I started in human resources, funnily enough, because I did a psychology degree at uni and I was always very interested in people and, behaviour and what made people tick. And went into human resources in a large organisation back in the UK and realised I hated it because it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was more about helping people in the workplace, when actually it was more about redundancies and, grievances and those kind of things. And so very quickly made my exit from human resources and moved into CSR. So this would have been, back in the UK. At that time, CSR was very much around community focus and giving money to charity, and then sustainability in terms of corporate sustainability was just starting to emerge. That's when I started working in the space, so it's quite exciting to be in it from the very beginning, from when companies were first starting to set up carbon management programs and starting to put targets in place. And so that's basically when I started back in the UK and worked in that space for 10 years over there for 2 large corporations, and then moved to Australia, and I've been here for 5 years now.
And so what's I'm interested to know within that space, what has changed and how has it evolved? 15 years in the sustainability terms is actually quite a long time. I'd like to think we've moved forward, we've progressed in that time. What have you seen change?
I saw a big change from the UK to Australia, so that's probably the first thing. So when I moved here, the corporate landscape was very different. I felt the corporate scene here was not as progressed. I kind of felt like I'd stepped back 5 or 10 years. And for that reason, went to actually work in local government, because I felt that a lot of the local governments were doing more than a lot of the businesses here. So I did actually have a bit of a career change then, and I worked in local government and sustainable communities for a few years, and then subsequently went back into corporate. So that was the first change that was huge for me, moving countries. The other thing is that I think businesses have started to see it more as a strategic issue as opposed to a PR or marketing issue, and that's changed a lot as well. So back in the day, sustainability or CSR might have been tagged onto the marketing teams, whereas now it might be more operational, or it might be more much more strategic, or so that's definitely changed, and that's a good thing, because it means it's getting more embedded into the organisation as opposed to paying lip service. And then the other thing that's changed is consumer sentiment and the public. So certainly over the last 3 to 5 years, obviously the climate debate is much more forefront for people. The waste issue, the plastic pollution, people are talking about this more than they ever have done, and that wasn't the case 15 years ago. I used to say to people 15 years ago, oh yeah, I work in sustainability, and they would give me a blank look and be like, what the hell's all that about? And they'd be like, oh yeah. But they didn't understand. Whereas now, if I say to people I work in sustainability, they'd be like, that's really great, we really need that. We need people like you. And it's like, so it's definitely changed in that understanding, which is good for me. Then people know what I do. I don't get the blank look. Yeah.
And you worked in local council here in Sydney, and I find, as you pointed out, corporate social responsibility is becoming more and more about managing risk, like genuine risk, as opposed to the lip service, you might say, or less about the PR. It's actually about how can we get our stakeholders together or our supply chain and actually make change, because we need to manage this risk. Like that would be something that the message, at least from someone who doesn't work specifically there, that's what it sounds like. That's what the conversation is. But would you say that is true, or do you think that's a bit of lip service in itself?
No, so obviously there is an element of risk. So there's companies that, will genuinely start to look at climate risk and how it's going to impact their bottom line and their supply chain. And, obviously investors are more interested in the conversation now as well, because they see it as a risk. It's also an opportunity. So, there are companies that are now understanding this space, are developing products and services around sustainability. And, as we know, younger generation, millennials, they want to buy products and services that have purpose and align with their values. So again, companies are seeing that. You're probably seeing, eco products and brands growing, and so in that sense, there's also a big opportunity for business as well.
Okay, so would you say influenced more by consumer sentiment than risk?
I think it's both, because the consumer and the investor, certainly if they're a listed company, do hold huge sway over business decisions. So,
because you've had such a long and diverse career, what's an element or a time in your career that you sort of still to this day reflect on? It can be a success or something you felt you really learned from.
Well, I think we probably reflect more on our failures than we do successes.
The human nature element of this, yeah.
The negativity bias. But I think it's a good thing, because we learn from our mistakes, right? So there's no point in just talking about our successes all the time, because you don't necessarily learn from them, even though they're great to have. So I think in my early career days, I was literally kind of thrust into a sustainability role without really having any experience, because nobody did back then, and kind of delivered a few projects which some went well and some didn't, because I just really wasn't prepared to deliver programs on that scale back then. It's just and so I guess it's all part of a learning curve. So I guess a lot of my reflections do come from those early days, and then I've learned how to actually create change. How do you get people on board? How do you get your stakeholders on side? How do you go to the board and ask for money? And it's those kind of things which take time to learn and finesse and adapt to each organisation you go to. So, but yeah, certainly in the early days, it was just make it up as you go along. And I don't know, for the best. That was my first few years in sustainability, anyway. But I did have some big wins as well. So.
So I feel like the concept of, in the early days, going to the board and saying, so this is really important and we need money for X, Y, Z, they must have been some difficult conversations. Or did you ever feel like you were equipped to have them and you didn't actually have them and you could have? Where were those moments, I guess, where you had that real learning?
There were difficult conversations, because even if they got it, it was always a low priority, operations or bottom line, or everything else would come before that in terms of priority. So even though they got it, or even if they got the moral argument as opposed to a commercial argument, it would still be a difficult job, asking for time, attention, resource, money, all of that sort of stuff. Yeah.
And so was the sustainability team often known as like the greenies of the office? Was there a bit of that bias as well when you first started, or even as you continue in your career? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think there is. I think it depends on the organisation, because sometimes it is looked at like, the sustainability team, they're the ones that do sustainability, and we don't really have to because they've got it covered, So, and it's like, no, everyone in the organisation needs to do sustainability. It's not just this team of people, but yeah.
I had an interesting experience this week when I'm very passionate about promoting a sustainability framework with my organisation, and I'm lucky enough to be selected to be on the working group, and my boss says to me, you love sustainability, so that's why you're on it, because of your passion, and I said, well, I also just think it should be everyone's passion. I'd love for it to be, for sustainability to work, it needs to be embedded, and everyone needs to feel like they have a responsibility for it. And you get the kind of smile and nod as if to say, that's fantastic, I have zero idea how to help you do that. She's got the greatest of intentions, but it's really difficult, I think, to embed it, and it's easier to say, that's your responsibility, and you think about it because I don't have capacity to, because I've got to manage this, that or the other. Yeah. So.
I think so. I think the easier you can make it for people to say, this is what you need to do, this is your part, and building that learning and that confidence, I guess, that everyone can act, everyone can do stuff. You don't have to be a sustainability expert. You or everyone through their everyday actions and decisions will have an impact. Yeah.
Now, I've been watching you eagerly since I met you 3 years ago, and I must say you really have found your purpose within the climate change emergency. So how important do you think it is to take the time to understand what lights you up, and what did that journey look like for you?
Wow. Well, I think initially my purpose in the climate journey started as a business imperative, and then it's very much moved into a personal why for me. So like obviously it's obviously still a business imperative, but in terms of my role in it, so it was initially about working with businesses and setting climate change targets, and then through that personal purpose journey, it's now become a personal why. And so yeah, I guess it started when I did CSL, Centre for Sustainable Leadership Programme. Do you remember we had to write a 5-minute talk on a topic that we were passionate about? I wrote this talk, and it was it was quite dry, and it was full of facts and figures, and it just I didn't really get into the why was this topic important to me. I just knew that it was. So it was about girls' education and climate change and the links between the two. And then, obviously the great facilitators that we had on the course, they kind of push you into deeper into thinking about, okay, so what is it you're trying to say? And why are you trying to say this? And then actually what emerged was a very personal story about women's empowerment and girls' education in my own family, and how that had played out over 3 generations. So basically my grandma was illiterate most of her life. She didn't get to go to school. And went back to school at 60 to learn to read and write English, because she wanted to read the Bible as a born-again Christian. My mum, never got to go to college because she had to have an arranged marriage, and then she eventually went back to university or to college and, founded 2 businesses. And then there was me who, I've got millions of degrees, or it feels like I've got millions of degrees. And, I love learning. Love of learning is my number one value. But unfortunately, there's still 130 million girls around the world that don't get to go to school simply because they are a girl. Obviously, this issue started to become more and more important to me. It became much more of a personal journey as to, I'm now in this privileged position, and I've got to a place of privilege, and therefore I should pass that on in the sense that I should help others achieve that status that I've been able to, through the generations. And then I was at a purpose conference a couple of years ago, and Paul Hawking was there, and he was talking about Project Drawdown, and he said, we've done the maths and we've looked at the solutions, and girls' education and women's family planning is one of the number one solutions to climate change. And I guess that was a real kind of aha moment for me, because then it brought together 2 areas that I was really passionate about. So it was kind of just a total no-brainer that I needed to do something in this area. And it's quite funny, he says that the solution wasn't a solar panel, it was a woman. And that actually surprised them. It surprised lots of people. It surprised the researchers that were working on Drawdown. And so obviously within those solutions, there's there's solar, there's agriculture, there's refrigeration, there's a number of different things that need to happen. But I guess no one anticipated the links between gender equality and climate change, the way that it kind of came about as being such a powerful solution.
And so tell us a bit about it being a powerful solution for those who might not be aware. Like, what is the implications of, or rather what are the impacts that gender equality have on reducing and curbing emissions? Like, that's fundamentally what that... So for everyone, Project Drawdown, 100 solutions to resolve climate change, written by Paul Hawken and many, many scientists worldwide. And you're right, it was... I was at that conference with you. Yeah. Paul Hawken, that was an absolute moment in time that I'll always remember. Obviously, when he said refrigerants were number one, we all gasped.
Right, that's boring. Tell us a better number one, please. Yeah.
But the facts are the facts, and we accept them as they are.
We accept science.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, the importance of finding the solutions that light you up. You know, if you're not lit up by refrigerants, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. But you're lit up by empowering girls and gender equality. And why is that so important? Why is it in the top 10?
Yeah. So I guess the first one is, if a girl goes to school and she managed to stay in school, she will, 1, marry later, and 2, have less children. So there's a clear implication there from a population perspective. So if girls did go to school, I think there was a statistic that the population would decrease by 1 billion by 2050 if every girl was allowed to go to school and finish school and not have to leave because there's an arranged marriage, or she becomes a child bride and things like that. So that's the first one. The other one is, if a girl is educated, she will have more knowledge about family planning and the rights that she has over her own body, etc. So again, that has that implication linked to population. The other thing is, obviously, if girls go to school, they will have more earning power, and they actually reinvest their earnings in their family and their community. So it's called the girl effect. It's been known about for quite some time. So that has multiple benefits across the community, because obviously that money is not being earned and sent somewhere else. It's helping the local community. And then the other thing is the links between women that are educated and agriculture. Women are the majority of smallholder farmers across the world, and compared to men, they have less access to resources, less land rights, less access to equity and training. But if you closed that gap, they would be able to produce more food on the same amount of land. So not only has it implications for food, it has implications for deforestation, because we're not clearing more land to grow more food. We're able to just, use the land that we're already cultivated. Yeah, and then we can preserve more forests. So we could actually avoid another 2 billion tonnes of emissions by 2050 if you empowered women farmers in the same way, or you gave them the same rights and access to training and resources that men had. And, when you start to look at stats like that, it just blows your mind. It's kind of like, so why aren't we doing this? This is just, it feels like a total no-brainer. So there is this link, which it's not obvious, we don't necessarily make it unless you have heard about this project, which is obviously a very groundbreaking project, or, you have an interest in it and you go to look it up, you don't necessarily know about it. So that's something that I now actively go and I do talks, and, I'll tell people about it, and I'll fundraise and, things like that, so that people can have this awareness and knowledge of how do you join up these big issues, these big topics, because, gender equality, that's something as old as time itself, and then, climate change, which is this imperative that's happening now, and it's kind of like, well, look, we need to start thinking more holistically and more systemically about these issues, and not trying to tackle them in isolation.
And I believe it was actually Paul Hawken, potentially at purpose, that did mention that climate change is so the solutions to climate change is kind of baffling, because they're all things that we should be doing anyway, especially when it comes to gender equality. I don't think it could be more true for this particular topic, because I look at it from the outside and I think this, to me, is just a social good, and it's essential for everyone, for communities everywhere. And yet it also has a huge impact on the climate, and it seems like that is laced throughout that whole project. And I don't know if you feel the same way.
Oh, totally, yeah. So so you've got links between gender and agriculture, you've got links between gender and energy. You know, imagine if you empowered all those women in those communities to learn about renewable energy as opposed to, you know, relying on the horrible like kerosene lamps and things like that. So it's definitely laced throughout. You know, I came across this quote, and I don't know whose it is, so I don't know who to attribute it to, but I saw it online, and it says, "Some things break your heart but fix your vision." That's what that did for me. Like, it breaks my heart that there's still 130 million girls around the world not in school, and it breaks my heart that women don't have the right to choose when, where, and, you know, how they have children and what they can do with their bodies. But it has focused me on, yes, this is a topic, this is something I need to show up for, and I need to use my voice for. And that's something I've been thinking a lot about, is the power of voice and how we use our voice for those that don't have voice. So, you know, for me, those girls, they don't have a voice. Nobody's listening to them because they're not seen as valued, or, you know, the environment doesn't have a voice and we have to speak on its behalf, or animals, and, you know, things like that. So it's how you lend your voice for those that don't have it. So I had this hashtag, which is Voice for Good, and that's again something that drives me. Is like, okay, so how can I use my voice for good for those that don't have a voice? I think that is a call to everyone, really, in terms of how can you use your voice, in terms of whether it's about doing more in the workplace, or writing to your MP, or, you know, sharing stuff on social media. Like, it's all powerful stuff, and you know, we all have that. Certainly those of us that live in privileged and developed countries, we have the power of voice, and, you know, too often I think we don't use it.
That is absolutely true of a lot of things, and I would say Australia is quite a good example of the apathy around voice.
Yes.
And Australian
politics are very interesting, and have been for a few years, haven't they? I thought British politics was bad, but oh my God, I came to Australia and I was like, what is this show? You know, like, how many prime ministers, and oh my goodness. I
know Boris and Barnaby should go have dinner. It is an interesting thought though around voice, and I've had the pleasure of hearing you present before. You're a fantastic storyteller, and I really appreciate those moments where I get to hear you share your voice, and in particular your story, and the reason why this is so important to you. It's so beautiful, and I think too often we overlook the uniqueness in us individually, and we need to share it more often. So thank you for those stories.
Yeah, and I think also we don't know the value of our own stories. You know, like sometimes we play it down, or you know, and everyone's got a story, right, regardless of what it is. And sometimes we don't know the value of it, and other times we don't want to share it because we think it's insignificant, or it's silly, or you know. So it does. For some people, it takes more courage than others to actually own your story and share it.
It's quite funny. I'm thinking back to when we did Retreat 2 with CSL, and we were working really hard on our stories. And Luke, who was our coach, I guess, on storytelling, a fantastic presenter and creative, and he turns to me and says, because I'd given some half-ass attempt at, you know, a similar facts and figures kind of speech about why food was very important and agriculture was essential and the future of food, and he turns to me and goes, I don't buy it, you know, why does it matter to you? Like, and I put me on the spot in front of 50 people, and I kind of just sat there and thought, well, Luke, I don't know, it's because, you know, it's the thing that holds people together. And he's like,
there you go. Yeah,
there you go, thank you. I was like, wow, that was really hard, Luke.
But they get it out of you. Yeah.
They do. They coach it out of you, and it's all, you know, so those semi-insignificant things that you think, oh no, but it just makes sense to me. It's the powerful story.
But it's also that why, right? Because, you know, I don't know if you've seen the Simon Sinek stuff on the, you know, around why. It's like people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it, and it's so true. It's, you know, it's like, so for me, going to somebody and saying, you know, I'm delivering this training, or I'm delivering this talk, and it's because I'm passionate about girls' education, and this is why. And I go into the story of, you know, my own family. It's far more powerful and memorable.
And so you've taken all that, your story and that acute vision that you have and that sense of responsibility, and you took a bit of time to think that through. And I'd love to hear a bit more about that pause you took and how that then led you to the Impact Faculty, which is a really exciting piece of work that you're working on, as well as being a mum, having a full-time role, doing other things in your community. So you've got a very high sense of responsibility. You're doing a lot of things. But I think the impact faculty really encapsulates that for you.
Yes, it does. I think it was about 2 years ago that I quit the role I was in then and took some time out. It was my pause, yes. And I think at the time I didn't really know obviously didn't know where that was going to lead to or what was going to happen. But I think the real beauty of taking time out is that it does give you a chance to not only reflect but go in a direction that you are curious about, without that pressure of, like a day-to-day or being reactive to things or, so certainly for me, I took the time out, I did nothing for a short amount of time, and then I just followed my curiosity and just went, right, what is it that I'm drawn to? What is it that I'm good at? And then that's how, I guess, Impact Faculty emerged, because, I knew that I was very passionate about sustainability and engaging people in that and learning. I knew I was passionate about girls' education, so okay, how can I bring those things together? So the Impact Faculty was born in April of this year, and it's basically an organisation that does sustainability training and education in the view that, profits from that, all those courses and training that's delivered would then go to girls' education. So I partnered with an organisation called One Girl, and, so I would literally just provide funding for them, and then they go and deliver the amazing projects that they deliver around girls' education in Africa. So yeah, that's how that came about, and it was all very organic, and it wasn't like it was this thing, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to do it. It really did evolve, over time. Like first, it was just going to be a training organisation, then it was no, it's going to be a social enterprise, then it was no, it's going to be something else, and it was just like it's trial and error, and it's just kind of going with it and learning from what works and what doesn't. And even now I don't really know exactly what the Impact Faculty is. Like I think it's a social enterprise, but I don't know, who knows, like social enterprise doesn't even have like a real definition in Australia. So for me, I guess it's more of an organisation with purpose. So it allows me to bring together a number of different values and passions, and
So tell us a little bit more about One Girl and why you partnered with them specifically.
So One Girl is an Australian-based organisation. So they're based in Melbourne, and as I said, they do girls' education in Uganda and Sierra Leone. So they are two of the toughest countries to be born a girl. And that's why those countries are particularly important. And they're well established. They've been going for some time. They're really fun. They do a lot of fun campaigns. And yeah, I just thought it was, and I've been working with them for a while anyway in terms of a fundraising perspective. So I already had an existing relationship, and then I went to them and said, oh, hey, I've got this idea, I want to partner with on the Impact Faculty. And they were like, yeah, great. And so it kind of, again, came about organically because I already had an existing relationship with them. And also I feel like they're one of the organisations in Australia that are doing the most in this space. So like obviously you'll have like Oxfam and Plan and UN Women, but these are like global organisations doing stuff, whereas One Girl is an Australian organisation that has a decent following and still growing. So that's why I partnered with them.
Brilliant. And they've got, is it One Girl who has an event coming up in October? Tell us about that event. There's something happening in October that everyone can kind of get behind if they want to, if they're lit up by this, that they can follow and get behind.
Yes, so it is called Do It in a Dress. So September to October is Do It in a Dress season. So basically people wear a school dress to do various things. So they might go for a surf in a school dress, they might run a marathon, they might go to work in a school dress. Like it doesn't really matter what the thing is, it's just that you're wearing the dress while you do it. And the idea behind it is that you're wearing a school dress for those who can't, and then obviously you're raising funds, so it's a sponsored initiative. And yeah, it's really fun, and it kind of like it took off in Australia a couple of years ago, and like the photos of all these people doing stuff in school dresses kind of like went viral. And then since then it's been a programme that's run, or a campaign that's run every year around the same time. So I will also be doing it in a dress this year. So I'm going to go to work for a week in a school dress, and I'll be putting up my link and like, getting people to sponsor me to do that. And, so I'll just be going to meetings and presenting to boards and whatever else I'll be doing that week, but I'll be doing it in a dress. And I have done it before, as you know, that I did an event not last year, maybe the year before, where we had a film screening and a panel, and myself and the panel all wore dresses as well at the same time. So it's definitely really fun. So yeah, if people want to get involved, they can go to the One Girl website and just set up a fundraising page, and One Girl will post them out a dress for their size, because that's normally the one thing that comes up. Where am I going to get a dress from? There's not going to be a dress that fits me. Or I'm like, don't worry, we've got all that covered. We can get you a dress in your size. It'll be posted to your house. Like, it's easy, Don't come up with excuses. Just do it.
So Asha Kayla, LinkedIn, she's very active. If you wanted to support her while she's wearing a dress, I would love a photo of you wearing a school dress presenting to the board, if that's okay. I think that's appropriate, personally.
Yeah. I'm going to have to get two, actually, because I was thinking if I'm going to wear it for a week, I don't want to wear the same one every day. So, I've got one. I'm going to have to get another one. So I could just change it up and not be like, that stinky person in the office.
Oh, gosh. And look, as we're sitting here, it's actually less than a week away from the global climate strike, which is huge in itself. And I just think, we're coming up to Do It in a Dress, which is obviously an annual event that is really significant for your why. And then you've got just this surge. 2019 has just been formidable. And I would just love to get your thoughts on, how are you feeling at the moment? How is your focus going? Because you've been working in this for 15 years, and that to me just says resilience, endurance, persistence, but it's all coming, it feels like it's all coming to a head, but I don't know, have you been here before? Have you been in this headspace? Where are you feeling?
Look, I feel quite hopeful. I do. Certainly there's been times where you go, what the hell? Where are we? What are we doing? Are we ever going to solve this? I have had points where I've just gone, why am I even bothering? I'm sick of just having this same conversation. I'm sick of having this same conversation with people that this is something they need to take seriously. And, so I certainly have had those moments of despair. But right now I think we're at a tipping point, and we are, because we've only got a certain amount of time left to work on climate change. So I do think we're at a tipping point. I think, certainly the youth have stepped up. Obviously, we've got Greta, who's doing amazing things to bring attention, and, the school climate strike. And also we have the Sustainable Development Goals, which in themselves are quite an achievement, the fact that they were put together and agreed by all the UN member states. And obviously climate is a key thing that runs through all of those SDGs. So I do think we are at this point now where there is a tipping point, that we have got big businesses doing stuff. You have got, large organisations going 100% renewable, and companies and countries that are trying to move towards renewables and reduce their consumption. And, so that there is still the naysayers. There are still people that are climate deniers and don't believe it and are very much self-interested in coal and money, and, that's kind of not gone away. But at the same time, I do feel quite hopeful. And when you do have things like the climate strike, which is being supported by so many businesses, that's amazing. There's never been that point in time in Australia anyway before. So I think that's quite exciting.
I get excited as well, but I try and reflect on our federal election that happened this year. And I think one of the things that came out of that was that we need to be listening to people who don't necessarily either agree with us or aren't on the same social, political spectrum as us. So this whole conversation that's moving towards, we really need to have bipartisan support for the climate emergency, and then the kinds of conversations that are required to get there. I don't know if that's something that within your peers and your colleagues in this space that you've started thinking about or if that's something that's on people's minds about how do we actually get bipartisan support. Have we reached that point where that's really now the next priority?
I think we're starting to. If you see the number of councils that are starting to declare climate emergency, that is a bipartisan decision, because the whole council, regardless of their political alignment, will agree to that. And we're starting to see more councils across Australia doing that, which is great. So, and that's a first step. So even if we're not getting the leadership from federal government, we're getting some leadership from local government, which is great. But yeah, unfortunately, it is a very polarised debate, and social media doesn't always help. We end up, getting into these polarised and, really kind of heated debates online with people we don't even know. And, Everyone's a keyboard warrior, and it's like, oh my goodness. And I think it is important for all of us to listen to those different voices and different perspectives and meet people where they're at. And there's some organisations doing some great work on that. Climate for Change. Yes, they're doing some great stuff on this, where they'll actually host a conversation and facilitate a discussion, and it doesn't matter where you're at. It's more about, let's just have a chat. It's not about trying to convince you and convert you, and it's more, let's just hold a space and be able to talk about this, and ask the stupid questions, or say why you do or don't believe in this thing, and things like that. So they're I think, as an organisation, they're one that is doing some really great work on that conversation piece. Yeah.
And find those people and learn from them, I suppose, is the piece.
Yeah, because I think, I read a statistic which was really quite shocking, is that when people learn some information, it's pretty much they hold to that information for a very long time, and it's really hard to unlearn that. So a lot of views and perspectives that people have, even if they're outdated, they tend to hold on to them. And I think that's a really interesting point for certainly, change makers and people, that they need to know that that's something. So if you learned something 10 years ago and somebody said, climate change isn't real, all the stats are false, they might hold on to that for a very, very long time, and it's not something that you're easily going to convince them otherwise. So I think it's definitely really interesting how people learn, and I guess how we have to unlearn, because we don't very easily we're not very easily swayed, we're not easily persuaded. When we hold on to something, we have a perspective or a value that doesn't change easily.
And we're the product of the 5 people we spend most time with. Yeah. So there's that concept as well, that not everyone is going to be the right messenger to deliver a message for a specific person. So it's about finding champions within the community that other people can look to and see themselves in as well.
Totally. And it's quite funny, like there's people in my own family that are not necessarily the most sustainable people. And, it's funny, like every time I speak, they'll be like, yeah, I do my recycling, and it's kind of like, I do my bit. And, even my mum, she's not the most sustainable person either. And it's so funny, we went shopping when she was last in Australia, and the lady behind the counter said, would you like a carry bag with your purchase? And she went, oh no, thank you, we have to, we all have to do our bit for the planet. And I just laughed at her, and I said, since when did you start caring about, you're doing your bit for the planet? And she's like, oh, only when I'm with you, Ash. And I was like, okay. It's like, it was just hilarious, but it is true. It's that who you spend the most time with, and being the product of that. So yes. I'm actually influencing my mother, who is obviously of a different generation and a shopaholic. So
My mum's a shopaholic too, and she's a cruiser. She loves cruises. If you're listening to this, Julie, I have no issue with your cruise obsession, but I think the whole concept of cruises really ekes me out. But anyway, that's a conversation for another day.
Travel, yes.
Oh, gotcha. Now, I know that girls' empowerment is a real passion of yours, but there's another piece that you just touched on around Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. And I feel like it's been really exciting to see some of the courses and the workshops that you've been developing on that particular topic, because it's really putting what is essentially a fundamental sustainability framework into action, which I think is that translation piece. And what was some of the learnings you had from delivering those courses and the kind of engagement that you got?
The learnings for me were that you had to take what is a very kind of high-level global agenda and make it local and relevant. So whether it's a local council, whether it's a business, whether it's an NGO, it really comes down to, what does this mean for me and my organisation, and that's probably the key learning. Because even with climate change, sometimes it can feel like this big thing that's out there and it's a global topic and I can't do anything locally, and that's very much the same with the Sustainable Development Goals. They're like these big lofty goals, and it's like we've got till 2030 to achieve them, and the UN set them, and it's someone else's responsibility to deliver them. And it's like, no, that's not the case. It's more about, okay, so if you're a local government, how do you measure your progress towards them? If you're a business, how do you integrate them into your strategy in a meaningful way? If you're an NGO, how can you use them to partner with other organisations and bring your expertise to an organisation that needs, the skills that you have as an NGO. So for me, it was that real kind of cross-sector piece as well. Like, how can these organisations work better together using the SDGs as a common language? And that's again probably something we've not had before. So another thing that makes me very hopeful.
And do you think, like, through those workshops, do you think that common language and that common ground was able to be gained? Is that something that you saw happen, or do you think that the journey is only... I suppose everyone's at different places is probably part of the answer. You've got some people who were early adopters and others that aren't really sure how it applies to them, or they aren't sure if they should be taking responsibility. But how's the language changing? And did you actually get a chance to work with lots of different types of organisations, or was it more, were you seeing a bit of a trend in the people that were seeking your help?
No, definitely work with different organisations. What I haven't done is work with different organisations in the same room, which I think would be pretty amazing. So, obviously, like a council would come to me and say, we want to do a workshop for this team, or it was a business focused workshop, or so, but I haven't seen anything where it's bringing all those sectors together in one room and going, okay, how could you actually work together to solve some of this? And I think that's the real exciting bit that I haven't seen quite happen yet in the way that it could. But yeah, definitely everyone's at different places. Some people are still learning, other people have already been on the journey for a few years and taking it to the next level. And so yeah, it's definitely an interesting space.
And it feels, as someone who considers themselves a bit of an entrepreneur, for want of a better term, trying to see through some change and support change in the agricultural sector, I think the workshops that you were doing were so fundamental, because it is daunting if you're the change agent inside an organisation, or you've got a couple of people who really want to see something happen. It really is people power, but you've got to have the tools and the language to use. And as you said, those board presentation skills and the bucket of money sometimes as well. So
yeah, and I also think that because the goals are so universal, like there's 17 different topics. So there's definitely one or two in there that anybody would be able to relate to, So for me, it would be, SDG 4 and 5, which is education and gender. For someone else, it might be, SDG 14, life below water. So there's something in there that everyone will have some sort of passion or anger around, that they're not happy about, or they're like, it's unfair that we've still got people living in poverty, or it's unfair that we've got so much plastic pollution in the ocean. So there's something in there that everyone can have purpose around, and I think that is also really valuable. So again, sometimes when I do workshops, I'll ask people, all right, which one of these is most important to you and why? And they'll say it's gender equality, or it's life on land because I'm really passionate about wildlife, or whatever it might be. So there's always that link back to purpose as well on an individual level. So again, it's about, as I said before, it is about taking that global agenda and bringing it right down to that individual's why.
So powerful. So this has been a really lovely conversation. I feel like I've learnt more about you, my friend Asha. It's lovely. It is nice. We don't take enough time to stop and think about these and have these deep conversations anymore. But is there anything else? We've talked through a lot of your history and your passion and your work, but is there anything else that you really wanted to share with us today? Anything you wanted to contribute, or something we haven't touched on that you had hoped to?
Well, I guess the only thing we haven't touched on is the fact that I'm also a mum, and I have a little boy who, as you know, Xavier, who's going to be 4. I think that generation is the generation that is really going to be probably impacted most by climate change, and it's frightening as a parent, but also he's learning in a way that people of our generation never did. Like the other day, he came home from daycare and he'd been learning all about the coral reef and plastic pollution, and he's not even 4 yet, and he's learning these issues. He'll see a coffee cup on the street and say, "Look, Mummy, someone's littered their coffee cup. How naughty are they?" I'm like, "Yes, they're very naughty." So I just feel like as parents, we also have a responsibility to teach our children about these issues, and so that they don't make the same mistakes of our generations. you know. So I feel like, you know, certainly for all the, you know, the parents listening out there and the moms, you know, even if you're not working in this space or you don't do something, you know, in your workplace related to this, you can, certainly as a parent or as an aunt or uncle, really try and teach that next generation in your community. I mean, teachers as well, like in schools, they have a real influence on children, and if it's not built into curriculum, like put it in there, put it in your classes, make lesson plans around it. You know, it's I think we all have that responsibility to that generation.
Pay it forward.
Yes.
There you go. Thank you so much for talking with us today. It's been beautiful.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for sitting with Asha and I for this conversation. I've really enjoyed getting to know a friend a little bit deeper, and I really appreciate you being there with me. I thought it was a fantastic conversation and a beautiful reflection, and 3 things have really stuck with me. Firstly, showing up and using your voice for good on issues that matter to you. Secondly, some things can break your heart but fix your vision, said by Anonymous. And third, that everyone's got a voice and it's not insignificant. It will take courage to own your story, but that is the birthplace of true connection and influence. That is a message that is powerful and something that Asha, in my opinion, models beautifully in her work and in her life day to day. I learn a lot from her, and it's been something that's really resonated with me. Wherever you are, I hope that your day included some magic, laughter and gratitude. And if that's feeling a bit hard to grasp onto right now, don't forget the Climactic community and collective are here for you. Reach out to us on all the normal channels and we'd love to hear from you. Until then, have a fantastic rest of the week and I wish you all the best. Bye!
Thank you for joining us. You've been listening to Climactic, the flagship podcast of the Climactic Collective, a podcast network dedicated to lifting the voices of the climate community. You can find out more about the people behind Climactic and all the shows we produce at climactic.fm. We are a social enterprise podcast network, and we greatly appreciate your support. You can find a link to our Pozible where you can support us directly in the show notes of this episode or from our website. Thank you for listening, and from the whole Climactic Collective, keep up the great work and take care of each other in these climactic times.
The Climactic Collective.